Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Very annoying always for me to have to pull the mic down. You know, one day I'm going to get a nice big step here, even if Andre's introducing me, I'll be able to do it. But that's not in this life. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me today. Sorry, everything around here again. I much appreciate it, and can I just echo my own thanks to Ancilla and Lebo for wonderful arrangements. It's a great pleasure to be here. I just want to say very genuinely that I've been in this field for a long time now, and it's a huge pleasure. I think it's the highlight of my working life to have been involved with this community of which you are a part. I'm not sure what we call it anymore, but in this talk I'm going to refer to it as higher education development. We're not really the old AD anymore. There's so much that has happened around it, but that's what I'm going to call it, because I think that's what it's about. And right at the very end, I'm going to speak about the importance of the D in that abbreviation, HED, because I think it is absolutely crucial. That's what distinguishes us as a community, I think. And so it's been a real pleasure. Everyone says, oh, it's a privilege, and so it actually is, to be able to work with people who are innovative, who care. That's the thing, who actually care about the well-being of the students and the people around them. That has characterized this whole group. And activism as well, actually, wanting to make things better. So our field, of course it is academic, and it needs to be. We need to be based on sound theorizations, on proper rational argument, and good reading, and all of that. But, in my view, the essence of this field is to get things done. And if we don't fulfill that mission, then there's a big hole in what we are doing. And I think really amongst, I don't have to say that in this audience today, because you are the people who classically get things done. And that is a huge thing. And there are thousands and thousands of young people who are benefiting from that, as Amu said last night, actually. So, I care a lot about it, even at my ripe old age. And I want to speak about it a lot today. Because Ancilla should have known she was inviting trouble when she gave me this topic. And I'm calling it here designing, and it's a big word for me, the higher education system, big word, for, in the interests of student success. And I will take you through that. So my brief, I looked at the conference theme with some delight, because I love the big picture stuff, and here we were invited to imagine a vision. Ooh, imagine a vision, that is wonderful stuff, of student success in our century. So it's inviting us to think creatively and about the big picture into which we all fit. And more and more, colleagues, I think that we have got to get into a decisive break from old patterns which are constantly not delivering the goods in our sector. Poor old Einstein now is remembered mainly for this quote, which perhaps wasn't even his. If you keep on doing the same old thing, you're going to keep on getting the same old results. And as Andre said, I've been involved in examining those results for a long time, and sadly, they have not changed nearly enough over the years. So it feels that we've got to have if you like, a discontinuity in the way we do things, not just keep on with the way we've always done stuff. And that's really difficult in higher education because it is such a conservative field. Higher education, to me, we talk about innovation and knowledge contribution, it is still fundamentally a preserving profession. We preserve our disciplines. That picture of the old monk in the Middle Ages sitting on a high stool and copying out manuscripts to preserve knowledge is still very dominant, I think, in our world. And it's conservative for that reason. It distrusts change, and yet that's what we need. So big ideas, lovely. But plans are only as good as their implementability. And I think that for that reason, I feel entirely justified in saying, I want to speak very realistic about what the challenges are. This is a tough field, and we work in a tough area. And if we fool ourselves, if we indulge in wishful thinking, that's all that's going to happen. So we've got to get hard-nosed about some of this work, in my opinion. It's not to discourage people, the very reverse. It's so that we can work smart, as the Americans say. Target what we do to where it will have the greatest effect. Now, the key questions around that I'm working around here, 3 of them were given to me by Ansela. And I said that was inviting trouble. So, what does student success mean? I won't go very long with that, especially in view of transformation issues. Why is that important? Why should it be, as I think most of us believe, at the heart of our higher education system? The third question is the hard one. What will it take to put student success at the heart of the system? In fact, Ansela said in the institutions, I'm adding the system to that because I think, as you will see, it's vital to do it. And then what I'm adding myself, because it's fundamental to all this, how much do we understand of what it will actually take to ensure that substantial improvement happens? How sure are we of the interventions, the stuff that we're doing, that that is the right thing? And I think that unless we have a very clear and agreed, more or less agreed understanding of those things, we will continue to risk fragmentation of effort and loss of effect in that way. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. My overarching theme is this. It's a proposition, really. Here it is. There is a pressing need to design the South African higher education system to focus unequivocally. Let's not be confused about it. Focus unequivocally on student success and classically equity, not just of access, but equity of outcomes. That term has been around since the 1997 White Paper. And why is that? Because it's important. Because to ensure that higher education's crucial role, its contribution to social and economic advancement is fulfilled. And critically, and heavens, we should be learning this now, to achieve social cohesion, fairness, justice. Now there are implications of this assertion, this proposition. First of all, it is implying, and that's exactly what I mean to imply, that the current system is not designed for this unequivocal focus on student success. And I intend to go through that and show you why I think that. The second one is, in my writing, I am forever plagued by this terminological problem. You have to be able to say, when you're referring to the educational mission in higher education, it's higher education education. It's higher education research, whatever it is. The word higher education implies education, but higher education is much more than that. It's about knowledge production, it's about social relations and so on. So that is a huge pointer to some of our difficulties, that there are multiple functions of higher education and they bump up against each other. And we have to speak about it. We all know that, but we have to speak about it clearly. And it's inescapable. The third key point here, people often want to separate these issues. This term, equity and development, it's a dichotomy, if you like, seen as that, goes back to the early 1990s, in fact, when people, including Salim Madat and others, were trying to get a sense into South Africa of what entitlement do we have to higher education? What is its role? And the issue then was that if you opened it up too much, you would lose quality. That was always the fear. Right? And it's been around, it is still around today in many of our colleagues, let us face it. How many people do I not hear saying, we've got too many students in higher education? It's utter nonsense. And yet there's that feeling that we want to be more elite. We want to privilege quality, which is easy to get when you've got few and a selected group of people. We want to privilege that over the opening up. But in fact, I'm going to argue that it's not possible to do that anymore. is not even remotely possible to do. So I will get on to it. And finally, is that the right? Yes, that's right. So the other key preliminary point here is that if we are going to make sense of all of this and be sure to direct our efforts clearly, we have to distinguish between means and ends, goals and mechanisms. It sounds such an obvious thing, and yet it is so often not done. I'll tell you what I mean. In the educational function now, that's what I'm talking about, not the research function, I absolutely acknowledge it, but in the educational function. We have got to be very clear that we direct our efforts at the right things, where they are going to make a difference, in order to make use of the resources. And I want to say quite clearly, it's my argument, that the end goal of all form of education, no matter where, is to facilitate student learning. Now that is so obvious that it sounds ridiculous to have to say it, and yet it needs to be said. That is the end goal. And by doing that, you are helping the students to fulfill their own educational aspirations. And that, colleagues, is hugely about completing their studies. We can't make excuses that a little bit of higher education is a good thing. It's about completion. That's what students come for. That's what they come into higher education for. Now that, of course, carries other riders like quality and so on. But if we lose out on thinking that actually graduation is an essential measure of our success, then we are fooling ourselves. And finally, and this is perhaps hard for people to realize, all educational provision there, everything that's related and any related developmental initiatives, resources, etc., need to be treated as means to that end of producing student success, meaning that completion, good completion of quality degrees and diplomas, etc. And we have to see that these things are in service of that goal. They are not ends in themselves. And yet we struggle, we fight with each other about what's more important. I can remember a quite unseemly battle in the 20, 25 years ago in academic development between whether, ridiculous, but whether student development or staff development was more important. For heaven's sake, it's all about the same thing, right? And staff development is in service of student success. That's how we must see it. And yet we get into these battles. So I think it's very important to do that. Now I want to get into what I've been asked to talk about. What does student success mean? And you'll be pleased to know it's only one slide, because I think actually, in spite of all of the talk about it, it's not so hard to understand. It means different things to different groups. You can shout at me afterwards about this for oversimplification. For individual students, this is what it means. Gaining the knowledge, skills, attributes, and formal qualifications that you need to be able to realize your life ambitions. Intellectual, career, personal. That's what people come here for the individuals. What about for the country that pays for all of this? Well, in my view, it is to ensure that we have graduate output and outcomes. By that I mean quantity and quality. Outcomes, what is the actual quality of what is produced and its relevance and so on. That's got a number of important issues. It's numbers, it's quality, relevance if you like, equity, huge, mix of fields, and attributes that fit the modern world. Those must be sufficient. That's what the public is paying us to do. To provide those things in sufficient quantities, etc., to give us the advanced knowledge and skills that we need for all forms of development in the country. That is the public interest in higher education. So the goal, therefore, must be to achieve that. The successful completion, without which accessing all that stuff has just about no value. And yet, how often do we forget that? Just a quick look here. This is the CHE's definition, and it's quite similar of student success. Enhanced student learning with a view to increasing the number of graduates, output, with attributes that are personally, professionally, and socially valuable. Very neat. That's the quality of it. Now, that's one slide. That's as far as I'm concerned with stuff. Okay, why is it important? I hardly need to persuade you of this, but I'm going to make some points about it anyway. First of all, one of the reasons for its importance is that it's not being delivered yet, not in the way it needs to be. So despite claims of improvement, and I wish our DHEAD colleagues were here, because that's what we are arguing about at the moment, there is abundant evidence of severe underperformance in the system. Still, we know that. Racially skewed outcomes, and therefore waste of human and material resources. It's not acceptable. And what makes it much worse, and in comparison with countries like America, which also has difficulty with student outputs, we have a tiny body of students who are very select. You know, of our majority population groups, only about 10 to 12% of the youth is getting into higher education at all. Compare that with first world participation rates of high 80s, 90s, one country's even got 102%. It's a gross measure. We are nowhere near that. So we ought to expect to do well with the students who are coming in. They're not rubbish. Here are just to remind you, this is as up-to-date the data as I can find, from DHEAD all over the place. Under 30% are graduating in the time they are supposed to take. Huge costs to that happening. Under 2/3 graduate even within 6 years, and most of the things are 3-year programs. These are DHEAD figures, not mine. 1/3 have not graduated after 10 years. DHEAD is now tracking for 10 years. And we're getting students sitting in the system for 10 years, and not just uni systems. And the racial inequalities persist. And then the big statement from DHEAD, just under half of the young people who enter undergraduate degrees, contact or distance, never graduate. This is a nice understatement. This is a major challenge. I would like to say something special about the importance of equity. And equity of outcomes, not just of access. We've done well on access. We're bad on outcomes, which is my argument is that is the measure. That is the measure, not people sitting in seats. So, abundant indicators again, I think we don't have to be persuaded of that. If we haven't learned this from the last couple of years of eruptions in the system, then there's something seriously wrong. And for me, transformation means fair distribution of the benefits of higher education, not just access, the benefits of it, what comes out of it for you, and we do not have that by a long chalk. And it is the predominant imperative. It overrides everything else in importance in the country because it's such a huge issue for us of our past. And we've got major failure in that area. I said that 10 to 12% of our majority population groups, which are now African and coloured, get in at all, and actually half don't get out successfully. So let's say 7% of our majority population groups are succeeding. That is completely inadequate. And it undermines the improvement in access. I said earlier, equity on one hand, and development, meaning cutting-edge development, up to the minute science and all that stuff, are not separable goals because one cannot be achieved without the other anymore. We don't have enough people, if you like, to ignore equity and say, oh, well, we're just going to be hard-nosed and develop the talent here that is easily developed. We won't have enough people to do that. And at the same time, if you are trying to get equity and not bothering about the quality stuff, it is a hollow achievement to get people into something that has so little value. So we can't separate them anymore. And yet, when we look at the performance data, and this is DHEAD data as well, our population group, this is a DHEAD quote, these data still demonstrate apartheid-era patterns of inequality. DHEAD document, Higher Education Summit 2015. So why on earth, colleagues, is equity of outcomes not absolutely at the top of the agenda for the system? I cannot understand it. It does not seem to me to be rational at all. But maybe our expectations of rationality are misplaced. Here they are. Right. I mustn't try and preach to the choir here. The point, though, is that we know, and I'm just going to whiz through this, what this is costing us. With this constant failure to meet the requirements. In individual life chances, not just material. In social and economic development in all ways. And this, I think, people don't take account of enough. I don't see how we are going to improve the education system as a whole from preschool right through unless we create a better pool of people who will drive that. Teachers, leaders, organizers in that field. At the moment, we know we are drawing on a small pool and we are creating a vicious circle because many people in that pool are not themselves well educated, not for their own, because of their own fault. And so we've got this vicious circle going round and round. Who is going to break that? I think higher education is the best place to break that, to create a bigger pool of people who can be persuaded to go into education. And finally, as we know from the recent student movement, social cohesion is massively important. And we are still faced with a maldistribution of the benefits of higher education. It can't go on, but it is going on. So, in summary, it seems to me that it's entirely the obligation of the higher education sector to do its level best to prioritize the meeting of these needs. Graduate production, equity of outcomes. It's a shorthand for me. Okay, just to say graduation, equity, shorthand. That's what we need. Because who else can do that? That is what higher education's role is in the world. Nobody else can produce graduates. And I want to ask, colleagues, I'm just leaving these as rhetorical questions hanging in the air. Has this responsibility been fully accepted by our sector? Not just in what they say, not they, we say, and particularly the public institutions. Mission statements are one thing. Where is that being demonstrated? What monitorable commitments and measures are in place to indicate this? And what is more, as I say, I think this is a powerful part of the argument. How can we fulfill our very reason for being, our raison d'etre, without prioritizing this student success agenda? You asked the question, I'm saying it ought to be. Now we've got a problem though. This strategic and social justice motivation has been around for a long time, at least since '94, but it's not happening. Why on earth not? What are these mysterious obstacles that are preventing this all the time? That's what we need to understand. So, now we're getting into the hard part. We talked about the ends. But the hard part is to say, by what means do we do that? And the question that Ancilla posed to me, what will it take really to put student success at the top or the heart of the agenda? I would say to you, we can't answer without understanding much more about what it entails. So this is what we have to do. Analyze what needs to be done. That's what I mentioned earlier. It sounds silly, but I don't think we are necessarily agreed. We identify who has to do it, because it's quite pointless to address efforts at the wrong people. Who has to be responsible for certain things? There are certain things that cannot be done by other groups, particularly government. Then, of course, we can start thinking about what policies, incentives, and so on are necessary to shift this super tanker and pin down the people that have to do it. Those are minimum conditions for understanding what has to be done. So therefore, it points to me, and here comes the word design, to a need for a coherent strategy of change, hard-nosed, not persuading ourselves with wishful thinking, really working on it. And colleagues, many of you will be sitting here, well, I'm sure, wondering, what has this got to do with me? I've got a very important role with the students in the classroom, etc. Well, this is our community. And if our community is not established on a firm basis, it affects us all, and the quality of our work. So, coherence, effectiveness. This is grown-up stuff that we need. And we're up against grown-up stuff, other vested interests. So I can't answer this question for you. what will it take to get it to the top of the agenda, and the rest we answer question 4, which is, what is it that we are trying to do? I'm sorry if that sounds silly, but, and of course, that's what I want to talk about briefly, and what are the implications for us. Before I move on, I'm just doing a sleeping check here. I wonder, I have a capacity to make people's eyes glaze over, and it troubles me hugely, so I'm just checking. Has anybody got any burning points they would like to make? And I mean burning now. Or comments or furious disagreements. I knew Winston would have them.
Prof. Scott, do we need, in light of what you said, do we need more central intervention from Department of Higher Education,
or more local autonomy on the part of higher education institutions?
Well, that question is absolutely on the button, and what I'm going to ask you to do is hold it, because I'm going to address that directly as we go on. And the answer is sort of yes to both, but how? Okay, that's what so thank you, that's a really, really important question. Who's got to do it?
I'm interested in at the organizational level, if you have seen teams or leaders and how they do the change inside the organization.
Again, I mean, it's a hugely important question, and I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm ducking the issue, but can I ask you to hold it too, because I'm going to address it directly. Okay, I'm going to push on, just in case there's anything really difficult that comes up. I was worried about Winston. Anyway, we're going on to question 4. Oh my dear, too slow. Of course, I can't list all the stuff here, but I want to make a few points about the big picture of what has to get done. Things that should be obvious, but often again are not. And there are 5 points briefly. First one is, what are we trying to do? Is there intentionality in the system to make the changes that are necessary? To design something to meet its central goal? And I don't think we can say clearly, yes, there is intentionality. I don't see it. I don't see it. And design is important. The second thing is that what we're seeing in the performance patterns that we briefly referred to is not some trivial little stuff on the side. It is in the core of what is going on. It is systemic problems that are holding us up. What else can explain the poor performance of the upper 10% of our population? It's nonsense to think that it's not important. Okay? It's not systemic. Welcome to the Cape Town delegation. Hello, Irina. So, crucial and systemic problems require systemic solutions. So, Winston, I'm starting already to answer what you say. Who can bring about systemic change? Not the individual institutions. Okay, they can't, and they won't. And then the critical thing is to, and this is so important to me, colleagues, to identify the big areas in which we have to work. And we have to get work done in all of them. The image that I have in mind is rich for me, because if you see me in the kitchen, it is a horrible sight. And if you are going to make, as I understand it, you do, a cake, you have to assemble all of the ingredients. They have to be there and then put together in the right way. It's very simple. If you leave out something important, which I'm afraid has been my experience, the result is a disaster. We've got to have the ingredients, all the bits of the machines, if you like, to put together something that works. But we don't have them. We don't even know what they are. Isn't that weird? I don't think we know what they are. We argue about them. How are we going to win? Okay. So we've got to do that. And then the key thing, again, as I've said, different levels, parts of the system, that's Winston's question, have to do what they are supposed to do. Not delegate. Do it and do the right thing. And of course, as I say, it's critical to take a hard notion of what we are up against. Otherwise, we just keep on getting into naive solutions. Design is a very important word to me. If we take seriously intentionality and coherence, design is a very important word. And to me, it incorporates all these meanings that are important to us. Clear purpose, planning, bringing multiple elements together into something coherent that works, employing different means towards a very specific end, a clear goal, and creativity. That's what we need if we're going to break from the old ways. And all of those things, if you think about them, colleagues, are central to any kind of educational development, really. All of them. What we do. And design for learning, I better go through this quickly, but it's a lovely concept, and I would recommend to you a paper that I've mentioned here a lot by somebody called Peter Goodyear, written a couple of years ago. Their references are here, and all the references are in this slide, which is about teaching as design. Design principles underlying it. Just a quick things that you might recognize here. Design is probably most powerful in education when conceived as the intelligent center of the whole teaching and learning life cycle. We have to think about it holistically. Crucially, when you work with design, with the process of design, you can overcome the danger that affects so much of us. That is that we are stuck, we are submerged, as he puts it beautifully, in assumptions that come out of our disciplines, out of our regular practice, that actually need to be questioned and probably changed. But it's very hard to break that. This is lovely, a common design tactic is to reframe the problem. Instead of seeing the problem in the same old way, we have to think about it differently. And I think this is so true of much of what we do. To see whether a more radical approach, terrifying word for higher education, radical, might actually be better. And I absolutely believe that it is. And then finally, design usually entails resolving tensions. That's what we have to do between equity and development, local and international, what do they say, equity and excellence, all of those things have to be resolved. And that you can do, you can put them into tension, but design so that you get something good out of that tension. And anyway, I would just like to say that I think design thinking should form a very important part of our sector, the way we do things, and therefore it is an important attribute of academics in this area. Right. I must move. I just want to say something very briefly about the ingredients. What are the things we have to put together and make sure are working and putting development work into them? They'll be obvious to you, I think, and yet, amazingly, they are not honoured in practice in a coherent way. The first one is very much on our minds, and that is, and by the way, all of these things, individually and jointly, have a huge effect on the quality of learning, and what is more, on who succeeds and who doesn't in higher education, who feels at home in higher education and who is alienated in higher education. We know that, and they're also within our own control. So the first one is obvious, and I can't dwell on these: curriculum, content, and orientation. What people are learning is massively important. It is the intellectual heart of the curriculum. And again, it can alienate. Well, it's a complicated issue. Higher education is about exposing people to the unfamiliar, not just what they might want to feel comfortable with. Of course it is. We're going to have to battle through this. I'm not talking about it much here, except to say it must be attended to properly. And of course I think it will, because it has fundamental effects on curriculum delivery. And it's got its important place. The next one is what most of you are involved in, and that is the huge topic of delivery of that curriculum. Now, what does that mean? Look at all those words there: teaching, learning support, advice, guidance, etc. It's come from a UK source. Mentorship, etc., all of which we recognize. Plus, in our context, I would add psychosocial support and academic staff development, maybe other things. All of these things, colleagues, need to be in place, I would say, no matter what the nature of the curriculum is. This is why we have to deliver, whatever is there. Whatever its structure is, whatever its orientation, its content are. They are crucial, they are essential services. but they're not the whole story. They've got powers, and they've got limitations. And what is more, the delivery process is hugely affected, and I'll put it this way, either facilitated or burdened by the effectiveness of the content side of things. Is it the right stuff? If it's not, it's hugely more difficult to deliver that curriculum. And the structure. Now, this is a particular baby of mine, as many of you will know. The curriculum structure, the framework, and so on. If that is not right, if we are making assumptions about what students know when they come in that are simply wrong, they're not realistic, and heavens be doing that all the time. We are taking an unrealistic view of what the students are bringing with them from their previous educational experience. Colleagues, it is a mad thing to do, to make those wrong assumptions, and yet we do it all the time. And there are many people here who are bearing the brunt of the difficulty of dealing with that. Call it underpreparedness of the students of the university, whatever, but there is a huge gap, and that's just at the beginning. There are others later. So those issues hugely complicate or help the process of delivery. And in particular, I want to focus on this matter of concurrent student support. That is really all of those things that we've listed there. It's the old term in AD, concurrent, happening at the same time as the support, happening at the same time as the teaching, the delivery of the curriculum. And it is the huge emphasis at the moment. It is in fact the sole emphasis virtually in the new university capacity development grant and program. Because it takes the curriculum content and structure as a given. Almost none of those things, I would say none of them at the top, can challenge or change the fundamental structure or content of the curriculum in itself. They take them as a given. So they try to improve it, make sure it happens, but if there are fundamental mistakes, concurrent support has very limited capacity to deal with them. So it's a critical complement to, but not a substitute for, proper work, proper structure in the other areas. We talked about content, and I'm coming on to structure. And we know, by the way, from 30 years experience, and you can take me to task on this, but from 30 years experience we know how limited, say, a tutorial system is in dealing with fundamental differences between the student and the curriculum. I'm sure you won't like that, but I think I can show it to you a great deal. So, what's the third one? It's my hobby horse. The structural design, the curriculum framework, because in fact, in my argument, and sorry if I'm tiredly going on about it, but it is the area of the teaching and learning process where the systemic obstacles primarily occur. What are those systemic obstacles? That is where the mismatch between schooling and higher education demands comes in, where the failure of our curriculum to deliver on language development, which is so fundamental throughout the whole of Africa. Other academic literacies which the schools have denied to our students. We do not deal with that at higher education level because we simply do not have the space to do it, even if we wanted to. We can't. So there are a whole range of things like that. Therefore, this area is critical to get right. The curriculum framework. But it's often just taken for granted. And I would want to argue to you that in our context of extreme inequalities and people coming in educational background, it is not possible, colleagues, for any single structure, any single set of curriculum parameters to provide fairly for the full range of the student. To expect everybody to have the same, approximately the same level of understanding when they come in, to be able to be treated the same, is completely unrealistic. One size cannot fit all. And we have to ask ourselves, who is benefiting from it? So, just a quick example. And the point here is that if we misdiagnose the origin of certain difficulties, of obstacles in our teaching and learning process. If we misdiagnose that, we are going to apply the wrong solutions. And I want to give you a quick example. Many of you will know, I think all know, about the extended curriculum program intervention, which has its strengths and weaknesses, but it addresses structural issues. It's the only thing we've got that addresses these structural issues. And it is servicing, at the moment, only about 13% of the student intake. Maybe 15 is planned. Okay? There's some thought about going up to 30. But those numbers are paltry in comparison with the real need out there. We've done many calculations on this in different ways, and I can argue that it's a majority of the students coming in that would benefit from a different structure. Assumptions that match realistically. So it's a huge issue. So what are we doing now about the people that have got fundamental needs for structural change and so on in the system, but are the other 85%? Okay, maybe half of them don't need it. We've got a huge number who do. What are we going to offer? Well, at the moment, unfortunately in my view, the only thing we are offering is more concurrent support. There is nothing wrong. I'm not knocking concurrent support. I'm saying that if you do not have a suitable structure within which to apply it, you're going to be hamstrung. But that's what we are doing. 900 million next year going into the capacity grant, 300 million maybe into extended programs. It's paltry amounts actually. We have just reprioritized, isn't that a nice euphemism? Reprioritized 32 billion rands per year into student financial aid. Getting students into the system from which they have a 50% chance of getting out successfully. What are we doing? Prime example in my view of assuming that intervention in one area, i.e. concurrent support, can make up for major faults in another, whether they are curriculum content and orientation or structure. And I can give you many other examples but don't have the time. It's not just structure, it's about other things. Structure can't do everything either, nor can curriculum content. So I'm not going to go on. But we need, again, you see, this is the classic video, again, a different way of putting it, reframing the problem. For example, by seeing the problem as a symptom of some larger problem, which is what we should be doing. It's about the inequalities in the country, is a classic design move. Well, I'm going to skip over this because I think I've spoken about much of this in the course of this. But the point is, each of these important areas, the bits of machinery or the ingredients for the cake, have their own function and purpose. And they've got to deal with that function and not try to put in, for me, to expect that the sugar I'm putting in is a substitute for the baking powder. That's cool. I remember 2 ingredients that I'm going to. It's very. So we've got to be coherent in our understanding. We've got to have a recipe, if you like. A plan for how we put these things together, and we don't have it. And if we continue to misdiagnose, what we end up doing is treating symptoms rather than the underlying cause, and we all know what that does. What do we say about who is responsible? Well, it's essential. Of course it's essential. The development in all of these areas is taken by the people who can deliver it. Only the state can make and implement policy which needs to be enabling. Key overarching matters. That policy must allow us, encourage us to do our work, not hinder us. We don't need to be fighting an uphill battle. So I think now cycling with the brakes on, which is what we are doing a lot of the time, because the system does not support. So, and then of course at the other end, I think this was Winston's question, only the institution, and sometimes sections of that institution, can implement proper approaches in teaching and learning that are optimal for its own environment and its own students. So you've got to have institutional autonomy within bounds. The institutions must be provided with the overall enabling policy and the means to interpret that in its own way. I don't know if that answers you, Vincent. Yeah. So anyway, if any of these groups abnegate their responsibilities, or just inappropriate assumption of responsibilities leads to ineffective intervention, failure to meet the goals, and obstacles to success. And if we are trying to be advocates for improvement, we must direct our advocacy at the right body. So if we've got structural issues, there is no point in taxing the institutions with that. They've got no power nor will to do anything about it. It is only the state that can do that. And us maybe as pushers of that. So the next big question then is, if we accept the need for a big driver, a big structure, a plan, a recipe, who is going to drive it? Just a quick word on this. I've recapped what we have got. Of course, we've been grappling with this issue for decades. But it is time now, colleagues, for us to say we can't have these little ad hoc things going on, however smart they may be. We've got to pull things together and get serious, or accept the consequences, which is continuation of the status quo. That's what we have to choose. So we've got a pressing need to get at least sufficient consensus. Remember that old transition term, interesting one, on various things. What needs to be done, who has to do it, what are the obstacles to doing it, and who's going to drive it. Those are the things we have to do. And you give me 5 more minutes to try and deal with this. So, the roles. State, I think I've said, providing enabling policies. Funding is absolutely crucial, and it is going to the wrong things, as we'll see. Steering the system in a sensible way. And that role is an essential condition. Nothing can happen without it. And then the institutions must surely be in a way forced, if you like, to ensure that the educational mission is given its due role. And who here thinks that it is doing that at the moment? There may be some institutions, I don't know of any. We've got to reflect this priority, that's the thing, not in talk, but in our core strategies, our operations, our reward systems, the way we use the money that comes into the institution. I was appalled a little while ago to hear about a very important institution, good institution, that was using a lot of the income from undergraduate teaching, both state subsidy and fees, to support contract research, which was being paid for, but not paid for at the right level, because the researchers don't want to charge their clients too much money, etc. It's supposed to be a revenue stream, but it was taking money away from the teaching and learning area. And I don't think it was just in this one institution. Anyway, and we've got to get people to accept accountability. I'm going to finish with this. In what ways is our system, I'm coming around to the beginning here, not designed for student success? What are the obstacles to this unequivocal focus on student success? Well, you all know this. Across the university sector, and unfortunately it is international, there is no, nice expression, parity, equality of esteem, of respect for the different functions of higher education. Brenda Leibowitz's little op-ed recently states it very beautifully. In universities of all kinds, he didn't say this, but it's part of what you were implying, I can see it around the world, all kinds of orientations. The dominant perception is that research is valued and rewarded more highly than teaching. We are dichotomized. Does anybody seriously disagree with that? That is the enemy of what we are trying to do. Not research, that's not the enemy. It is the dichotomizing and the unfair favoring. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that, which will take another talk to do. It's about institutional culture, deep culture, colleagues. This is why this is what we have to take on, is deep culture. And how are you going to do that without pressure, incentives, etc.? I do not know. Culture is the toughest thing to change. Aspirations, what universities see, even institutions that have got no research activity want to have it. They see that kind of area of work as bringing them the respect and advancement and profit that they want so desperately. In other words, they do not respect their own core mission, which is actually the most important one in any developing country, and that is developing students into highly educated adults. What can be more important in a developing country, especially? How we use our revenue and resources. I've just given you an example. And the staff that we recruit. I mean, my university is horrendous. I don't know of anyone, except in our area of work, who has been hired because they're great teachers. And they're certainly not promoted. We have stories about that and so on, but people laugh when you tell them these things. We reify international rankings, and we use that as an excuse for all sorts of things. It was the sole item on Loyiso Nongwana, I can't remember now, the previous Vice Chancellor of WITS, was to move WITS up in the rankings. What does that take? Doing your work better? I wish people even knew about it. And then comforting myths. I'd love to speak about this, but it isn't now. What we tell ourselves about why it's not our problem in this, all over the place. So what I'm saying to you, colleagues, is that the odds are stacked against, unfortunately, this is the reality, the prioritization of student success. So answer, there's no easy way to answer your question except through a broader strategy. And the level of the state, primarily the DHET, because it holds state power in this area. And there are good signs here. The DHET has focused increasingly strongly on student success and equity in what it says in its documents. And I hugely welcome that. It's a fairly recent development. But there are substantial obstacles in practice, and I just want to mention two. An overarching issue that in practice, these are hard practical points, the system remains powerfully geared to enrollment, what they call inputs, rather than increasing student success. It doesn't pay you to put a whole lot of effort into student success. The subsidy system doesn't do that. And unfortunately, we are driven hugely by financial considerations. And even in the way the documents are framed, our own white paper, the recent one, the National Development Plan, NDP, look at where the focus is. What do people remember about that? Oh, we must grow to 1.5 or 1.6 million by 2030. That's what everybody remembers. Can you remember any graduate targets? Somewhere they got it around, so we like to get this. That's nonsense. Imagine being a business that's producing Coke cans and it does not bother with the output. It only bothers with the amount of raw material that you bring. It's ludicrous, and yet that is what we do. Finally, systemic interventions that will improve student success are extremely limited. In a rather unfortunate flush here, I said virtually non-existent in relation to equity. That's not true. It's not fair, because there are the extended programs and so on. But otherwise, read the latest DHET document and get the sense of this. So, in summary, and I'm finishing here, there is at present no indication of a vision of the system that is designed to break decisively with our performance patterns, which, in the DHET's own words, look like the apartheid era. The prevailing systemic conditions, these things I've just been talking about, money and the way things are focused, not mission statements. Those are the things that influence universities' behaviors and priorities. Far more powerful. That's true. That's why we get what we get. So the nature of the present system favors the status quo. How can this be? And is an impediment, not just neutral, it's an impediment to placing student success and equity at the heart of the agenda. I wish I could go on, because I think there are, and by the way, I did deliberately put stuff into the slides that I hope that people will read and maybe deal with. But colleagues, the overall message for me is that as a community, a much responsibility lies on us to push for this kind of change. Where else is it going to come from? DHET, short-term, pressures, the institutions, not a chance, as I see it. They're not voting for change. They're not going to be the origins of decisive change. The students, powerful allies, if things can be directed in the right way, but student bodies are not the bodies that can make these changes. You've got to have continuity. Business, organized labor, you name it. If we go through strategically who can make the changes, then I think we are going to see that we, the higher education development, fraternity and sorority, have got a huge role to play, and I think we've got to organize ourselves around those areas. I'm sorry I've taken long. Thank you very much for listening.